The shovel struck the damp earth with a dull thud that echoed through the silent cemetery. Jake wiped sweat from his brow, his hands trembling not from exertion, but from a hurricane of emotions threatening to tear him apart. 3 months since Mom's funeral, and the questions kept him awake every night. The rushed burial, Dad's strange calmness, the missing autopsy report. Something wasn't right, and tonight, he'd finally know the truth, no matter the cost. "They all think I'm crazy," Jake whispered to the moonlit headstone. "Maybe I am, but I know you didn't just die, Mom. Someone took you from me." The official story was straightforward. Cardiac arrest, unexpected but natural. Yet his mother, Elizabeth, had been the picture of health at 52, daily runs, perfect checkups, not a single prescription to her name. Then suddenly gone, with his father, Richard, insisting on the quickest possible funeral. As Jake's shovel hit the coffin with a hollow thunk, his heart raced. Was he prepared for what he might find? For a moment, his resolve wavered. Then he remembered his mother's voice. "Always trust your instincts, sweetheart. They'll never lead you astray." With shaking hands, Jake cleared away the remaining soil and pried open the coffin lid. The hinges creaked in protest, breaking the cemetery's eerie silence. What he saw inside made his blood freeze. His mother lay there, just as beautiful as he remembered, but something was horribly wrong. Her once peaceful face was contorted in what could only be described as terror. Her fingernails were broken and bloody. Deep scratch marks covered the coffin's interior. The realization hit Jake like a physical blow, sending him stumbling backward. She had been buried alive. Jake collapsed onto the wet grass, his mind reeling as the horrifying truth crystallized. His mother hadn't died of heart failure. She had awakened inside her own coffin, alone in the dark, desperately clawing for escape until her oxygen ran out. Through his shock, a cold clarity emerged. This wasn't a medical mistake. Someone had wanted his mother in that coffin before her time, and Jake had a sickening suspicion about who. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Emergency services, what's your situation?" came the dispatcher's calm voice. "I need police at Oakwood Cemetery immediately," Jake said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I've just discovered evidence of murder. My mother was buried alive." While waiting for the police, Jake's mind raced through the past few months. His father's peculiar detachment after Mom's death, the hush phone calls, the mysterious woman who'd started visiting their home, Vanessa, his father's grief counselor, who seemed anything but professional. And then there was a life insurance policy, $2 million that his father had taken out just 6 months before Mom's death. The distant wail of sirens pulled Jake from his thoughts. Flashing lights appeared at the cemetery gates, cutting through the darkness as police vehicles approached. Jake stood, steeling himself for what was to come. He knew how this looked, a grieving son desecrating his mother's grave. But he also knew what he'd found. Detective Morgan was the first to approach, her experienced eyes taking the disturbed grave and open coffin with professional detachment. "You the one who called this in?" she asked, her voice neither accusatory nor sympathetic. Jake nodded. "My mother didn't die naturally. Look at her hands, the coffin lid. She was conscious when they buried her." The detective approached the coffin cautiously, flashlight beam illuminating the grim evidence. Her expression hardened as she examined the scratches and bloodied fingernails. "We need forensics here now," she called her team, then turned back to Jake. "I need you to tell me everything. Why did you dig up the grave tonight?" Jake took a deep breath. "My father rushed the funeral. No autopsy, closed casket. He claimed it was what Mom wanted, but that made no sense. She'd always talk about donating her organs. Then there's the insurance policy and his new friend Vanessa, who's practically moved in already." Detective Morgan listened intently, jotting notes. "And where is your father now?" "At home, probably with her. He thinks I'm staying at a friend's place tonight." The detective nodded. "We'll need to bring him in for questioning. In the meantime, I need you to come to the station. This is now a homicide investigation." As forensic technicians swarmed the gravesite, Jake felt a strange mixture of vindication and horror. He'd been right, but the truth was far worse than he'd imagined. At the police station, Jake sat in a sterile interview room, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Detective Morgan placed a cup of coffee before him. "The medical examiner has confirmed your suspicions," she said, sitting across from him. "Your mother was alive when buried. Preliminary findings suggest she was heavily sedated but not deceased." Jake's hands tightened around the coffee cup. "My father did this." "We're bringing him in now," Morgan replied. "But I need to understand the family dynamics better. Was there tension in your parents' marriage?" Jake laughed bitterly. "My father is a narcissist. Mom was a successful one, chief surgeon at Memorial Hospital. He resented living in her shadow. They stayed together for my sake. But I left for college last year, without me as a buffer." His voice trailed off. "And Vanessa? How long has she been in the picture?" "I first saw her at the funeral, consoling my father a little too intimately. Later I learned she's a pharmaceutical rep who frequently visited the hospital where Mom worked." Detective Morgan's phone buzzed. She checked it, her expression darkening. "Your father's been brought in, and we found something interesting at your house. A prescription pad with your mother's signature and traces of a powerful sedative in her makeup products." Jake felt sick. He was poisoning her gradually. "It appears so, and we have a witness. Your neighbor saw your father and Vanessa together months before your mother's death." The interview room door opened, and another detective entered. "We've got him in room 2. He's asking for a lawyer, but Vanessa is talking. Says it was all Richard's idea. She just supplied the drugs." Jake's world narrowed to a pinpoint. His father, the man who had taught him to ride a bike, who had cheered his graduation, had murdered his mother in perhaps the most horrific way imaginable. "I want to see him," Jake said suddenly. Detective Morgan hesitated. "That's not standard procedure." "Please, I need to look him in the eye." After a moment's consideration, Morgan nodded. 5 minutes. No contact. Richard Thompson sat at an interview table, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. When Jake entered, his father's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with contempt. "You did this," Richard hissed. "You couldn't leave well enough alone." Jake stood tall, his mother's strength flowing through him. "Why, Dad? Was the money worth it? Was she worth it?" Richard's facade cracked. "Your mother was going to leave me. After 25 years, she was filing for divorce. I would have gotten nothing. His voice rose to a shout. "She built her career while I sacrificed mine. That fortune was as much mine as hers." "So you buried her alive," Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. Richard's eyes darted away. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The sedative should have stopped her heart. It was Vanessa's mistake. She calculated the dosage wrong." Jake felt a cold calm settle over him. "You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Both of you. And every night, I hope you dream of Mom, alone in that coffin, scratching to get out." Richard lunged forward, but the restraints held him back. "You ungrateful." Jake turned away, his father's curses fading as the door closed behind him. Detective Morgan waited outside. "We have enough for an airtight case," she said. "The DA is already talking life without parole." 6 months later, Jake stood before his mother's new grave in a different cemetery. The trial had been mercifully brief. Richard and Vanessa both received life sentences with no possibility of parole. The evidence had been overwhelming. Jake placed fresh lilies on the headstone. "It's over, Mom." Justice was served. He traced the engraving. "Elizabeth Thompson, beloved mother, brilliant healer, eternal light." As the autumn breeze rustled through nearby trees, Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The nightmares hadn't stopped completely, but they were less frequent now. He was starting medical school next semester, following in his mother's footsteps. "I miss you every day," he whispered, "but I'm going to make you proud." Walking away from the grave, Jake noticed a young woman placing flowers at a nearby headstone. Their eyes met briefly, and she offered a small, understanding smile. Jake nodded in return, a simple acknowledgement between two souls who understood grief. For the first time in months, Jake felt something like hope. His mother's voice seemed to whisper on the wind. "Always trust your instincts, sweetheart. They'll never lead you astray." He would carry her wisdom forward, along with her legacy of healing. And perhaps, someday, the light she had brought to the world would shine through him. If you found this story moving, please hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful true stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable darkness.